So we are really, really privileged this afternoon to be in the presence of some superstars in the world of literature and writing. And you're going to have to forgive me because we're going to have just 1 minute of pure fanboy behavior here. Well, I tell you just a little bit, if I can, not forget my notes, about our esteemed, brilliant panel. We're going to start geographically from the furthest point and work our way closer here to back home in East Africa. Javier Ortiz Cassiani is Colombian. He explores the connections between Africa and Colombia. He's a history graduate from the University of Cartagena and has worked at the University of the Andes and El Colegio de Mexico. A historian and writer, he is concerned with issues related to the nation, memory, discourse, representation, popular culture, and political and cultural history. He is prolific as a writer, as a columnist for newspapers, including El Espectador. I apologize for butchering all the names. He has received awards, including the one for Afro-Colombian of the Year in Media and Journalism. He's been an advisor to the Ministry of Culture, the National Center for Historical Memory, the International Center for Caribbean Studies at the University of Cartagena, the Truth Commission, we need one of those here for sure, and the Cartagena de Indias Historical Museum. He's currently an advisor to the Bogota District Institute of Heritage and Culture. Welcome to Kenya. Welcome. We're going to move back a little bit further east now, and we come to Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome Kevin Jared Hosein, a Caribbean writer who writes for young people and started out, as this really warmed my heart, as a biology teacher. And he has won many awards. He's Indo-Trinidadian, writes novels, books for children and young adults, and his writing has appeared in Granta, Lightspeed magazine, Wasafiri, and featured on BBC Radio 4. He has twice been longlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. He has been the runner-up for the Burt Award for Caribbean Literature for Young Adults and has won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, the OCM Bocas Prize for Fiction, and the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. Welcome. Moving just a little bit further eastward through the Caribbean, we're still in the Caribbean, Karen Lord from Barbados. She explores the links between the west coast of Africa and the Caribbean and Central America. Her first novel, Redemption in Indigo, published in 2010, retells the story and Singe Karamba the Glutton from Senegalese folklore. And her second novel, The Best of All Possible Worlds, is an example of social science fiction. Lord also writes on the sociology of religion, and her book, The Blue Beautiful World, was published in August 2023 by Del Rey in the US. One of the reviews in The Garden described it as a complex, engaging novel characterized and infused with forward-thinking empathy and respect, and noted that it has a lot to say about post-colonialism, which we've heard a lot about today at Macondo, though she plays with these ideas in a subtle and open-hearted fashion. Welcome, Karen. And finally, crossing the ocean to Tunisia, we have Yamen. Welcome, Yamen. An engineer and a writer, brings perspectives across disciplines, winner as well of multiple awards. His debut novel, La Marche de la Incertitude, appeared in 2010 and won the Comar d'Or Prize in Tunisia and other prizes in France. His next book was nominated for the Cinq Continents de la Francophonie Award and won the Biblioblog Prize as well as the Alain Fournier Prize. His third novel is titled La Mars Ardent and has been translated into English. In September in 2021, he published Belle Abîme, and in June 2022, he won the 4th Orange Book Prize in Africa. He has also crossed the ocean to be with us today from Paris, and we're very, very grateful for him to be here. I'm going to get us going by just reading, since we are talking about the sea and thinking about all these different currents and floating and crossing and everything else. I'm going to start by reading something from Shakespeare, from Henry IV. O God, that one might read the book of fate and see the revolution of the times, make mountains level and the continent, weary of solid firmness, melt itself into the sea and other times to see the beachy girdle of the ocean, too wide for Neptune's hips, how chances mock, and changes fill the cup of alteration. So Shakespeare captures something that I wanted to just allude to as we get going. Where did the oceans come from? Well, as a biologist, we can tell you 4 billion years ago as the Earth started cooling. And today, the sea covers 71% of our planet and holds 97% of all the water on the Earth. All life comes from the sea. The first chemistry of life, the first photosynthesis, began in the oceans. And only after the oceans detoxified the early atmosphere of Earth could life even leave the oceans. Most of the diversity of life still occurs in the oceans. And all land and all life eventually dissolves back into the ocean. From dust to dust, but it's actually from dust to the sea, is the more accurate description. Even all the fresh water, just that 3% of fresh water we have, starts out in the oceans. Humankind have traversed the surface of the seas for millennia. And our writers today are really going to tell us about those stories, those journeys. And more recently, we've even managed to reach its greatest depths. We have been sustained by the seas as we've journeyed across the world. The sea has always been an open horizon, dazzling and bright for our sense of adventure and curiosity. The sea has also been a barrier, isolating, and an absorber of trauma. Today, we try to own and partition and control the sea. Yesterday, Morocco signed the treaty to protect the open oceans. This brings 60 countries to signing this high seas treaty, and it will come into effect next year. And I will not mention the countries that have not signed the treaty, but you don't have to guess. The oceans are facing an unprecedented threat, from pollution to deep sea mining to microplastics. And again, the current headlines just this morning speak of people, human beings, crossing in boats, unwelcome and unwanted, but yet again being carried by the sea. We have journeyed as human beings across the ocean for over 1 million years, from our first wave of migration out from here, from this part of East Africa. We left Africa and we've been carried in waves across the world. And we are more like the sea than we may know. Blood, sweat, and tears are all filled with the salt and the water and the oxygen of the oceans. So as I welcome our panel, I'd like to start by asking you, you have crossed the oceans as a writer and as a person, and what does that mean to your thinking and your writing? Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much. So I just want to point out that especially when you mentioned how much of the ocean covers this planet, the reason my latest book is called The Blue Beautiful World is precisely because of that. And it assumes that the Earth is having a first encounter with other civilizations, but the idea is that there are already intelligences in the depths of the oceans that are going about their business and not really paying attention to us, but still touch us in ways of folklore and legend and so forth. So in all of my books, if it isn't an island, it's a coast. There's always some kind of connection, always some kind of encounter with the sea and the water. I mean, I come from Barbados, and you cannot get far from the sea in Barbados. We respect the sea. We have a saying, the sea has no back door. But at the same time, it is part and parcel of almost everything we do, everything we think of is a constant background to our entire lives.
I'll echo what Karen said about, the sea is our back door. We have a saying in Trinidad and Tobago that the sea is our birthright. And in terms of, well, not just to speak of myself, but my ancestors came from India. They did a 3 to 4 month journey to come to Trinidad. And what was interesting about that is that this is as indentured servants. They came from India to Trinidad, but a lot of them didn't want to come because at the time they called that journey the Kalapani, which means black water. And why they didn't want to do that? Because they said that if you were to actually leave the country and travel across the sea, you would be shedding your purity. You would be an impure soul to leave your country. And they convinced it by saying that, in the ocean itself, there were demons and there were rakshasas and there were jinns and all these things. So you should not leave the country and go to seek out others. Now, to convince them but the British would have brought them over after slavery ended. So they collected large cauldrons of water from the Ganges and they said, this will protect you. And they kept it on the ship. And for some reason or not, that was convincing to them. And I think about those cauldrons of water that, would have been perhaps just, dumped to sea. And that water may have been witness to a lot of stories that may not be in records, that may just be relegated to memory. And sometimes, I think about water as, the name of it is like sea or water as memory. And like I was talking to our festival director in Trinidad, and they said they were cleaning up, the bottles. And it's like, people, they drink like half the water, and then they throw it away. And it's like, no. You can't just throw away half the water. You have to take it and you have to dump it in the ground. Because a couple millions of years from now, if there's some human or maybe some other form of human, some other form of society, this water that is stuck in plastic, which would be in some landfill somewhere, and not back out into the atmosphere, evaporated and condensed and under transpiration back into the plants, is just stuck. And I think of the water as that these things hold stories and they hold memories. And I think of myself as that way too, that I don't have the recognition of that I would feel impure upon leaving Trinidad to come to Kenya or to go to any other country. And I think about how far we have come from that, but also how we are somehow returning to that we are somehow using the sea now as barriers rather than bridges.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I will speak in French, and Chris will translate for me. Qu'est-ce que la mer signifie pour moi?
So what does the sea mean to me?
Moi, j'ai grandi face à la mer. La Tunisie est un pays majoritairement côtier.
So I grew up around the sea because Tunisia is a coastal country.
Et la mer, c'est la seule raison qui peut me pousser à me lever tôt.
And the sea is the only reason that makes me wake up in the morning.
J'aime l'odeur de la mer, l'odeur de l'iode. J'aime quand le soleil se lève et qui commence à donner toutes les couleurs différentes qu'on peut voir à la mer.
So I love the smell of the sea, and then also when I wake up and I see the light when I wake up, that's also something that I like.
Et j'ai aimé la mer non seulement à son contact physique, mais aussi par le biais de la littérature, parce que la littérature nous a offert de très grands chefs-d'œuvre qui se passent justement sur la mer.
So I like the contact with the sea because it also connects to my literature, my work with literature.
It was not exactly that.
Come again, come again.
Okay.
Si tu peux
So
répéter?
I said that I know I love literature not only because I lived by the sea and it was an element of my childhood that
Okay.
I cherish, but I also fell in love with the sea, with literature, because we have major masterpieces that was written about the sea. For example, there is one character that I loved when I was a kid. He's called Sindbad le Marin. I don't know if you know it, and it's from the 1001 Night. Uh, and this guy, just go and have adventures that you can never imagine. So for me, the sea is a kind of mystery, and this mystery is calling you, and it called me too, and it's also a place to. It's a special place. I think that it's Plato who said there is the dead, there is the living ones, the dead ones, and the people who take the sea. It's a special condition. It's not. I regret that today we take the plane so often, but I think that there is something when you are on a boat and you know how fragile you are, even in something huge like the Titanic. You will feel that this element can decide of your life whenever it wants. So for me, the sea is a great source of inspiration and also a great source of sorrow, because the what you are saying about how the seas are now, and I hope that those politicians will made it, but I don't believe them anymore about signing things.
Bueno, la historia es una interpretación de interpretaciones, y aquí lo que va a ocurrir es una mediación, y seguramente lo que va a pasar es un teléfono roto, porque lo que yo voy a decir que es una interpretación de la interpretación la va a interpretar el intérprete y se las va a transmitir a ustedes, y entonces va a ser una cadena de interpretaciones.
Well, he's anticipating. Today we're going to have an interpretation of an interpretation. So in my case, I'm going to be his interpreter. So there will be maybe a risk of a broken phone, but we're going to do our best.
Bueno, para mí el agua, ¿no? El agua en sentido general, vengo de una región que está constituida y formada, y la identidad más fuerte es su condición líquida, ¿no? El agua como un referente importante.
So he comes from the sea, from a territory where there's a lot of work of water, and it's precisely a source of where he comes from, and it's constituent to what he is and does.
Pero esa identidad requiere una pedagogía también en mi nación, en la nación colombiana, porque no se entiende la importancia que tiene el océano, que tiene el mar, que tiene el agua, en la construcción de la identidad del Estado-nación colombiano.
So that identity requires a teaching, right? A teaching, because in Colombia there is not integral comprehension of the importance precisely of the water to our identity.
Durante mucho tiempo nos hemos asumido desde el discurso del Estado-nación como un país andino. Y cuando incluíamos las aguas, hablábamos del océano Atlántico y no del mar Caribe.
So Colombia has described itself as Andean nation state, and precisely when Colombia was described, it didn't describe itself as a country that had the Caribbean Ocean, right? But as that had the Atlantic Ocean, and that naming is important.
Y no hablábamos de Caribe porque el Caribe remitía a lo caníbal, al encuentro con Calibán, al encuentro con el bárbaro, el salvaje, el incivilizado.
So we didn't spoke about the Caribbean precisely because it was a concept that had a relation with the uncivilized, the barbarian. So
Mientras que hablar del Atlántico era conectar con Europa, conectar con el mundo civilizado. Hablar de Atlántico y no de Caribe era una forma de decir que éramos civilizados.
So precisely, in contrast, talking about the Atlantic Ocean was talking about a civilized concept, right? Having a relation with Europe, and despite the implications that had for the description of Colombia, that was the concept that we used, not a Caribbean Sea.
De manera que el viaje, para volver a la pregunta, el viaje acá es un viaje que no solo redefine la identidad que siempre defendimos, sino también que redefine o sirve de pedagogía para un entendimiento mucho más complejo y completo de la nación colombiana.
So the journey precisely on the sea is very important for the definition of what, for the identity of the Colombia, for the Colombia state, and it's important precisely to define our journey as a country.
Y por supuesto ayuda a entender la importancia de la diáspora africana en la construcción de esa identidad.
And it also helps to understand the role of the African diaspora in that identity.
Thank you. One of the most wonderful things about Macondo is the ability to connect across these great distances and realize that actually there are these deep fundamental roots, currents that flow between Africa and other parts of the world. And with our amazing writers and colleagues who come here, it is so inspirational for us, but it's also just a reminder that the world is so much more than we often remember or are allowed to remember and to believe. I'm going to ask each of you a question related to your writing and your work and your experience, starting with Karen. The Atlantic. It's been this incredible space, but also a place of great brutality. How does this influence writing, writers? The ocean as a place of sanctuary, of spirit, of worship, but also of death.
You're reminding me that there is, in fact, an undersea memorial by Grenada that does indeed commemorate those of the Middle Passage who would have died en route and would have been thrown overboard, and that's where their graves were. So that, of course, is very much in memory. You also remind me that Barbados is this country that is so small that when you're flying in, you can see the whole island in a glance. I want you to be aware of that. And also, it's very flat, but there is a point that is technically a mountain. And when you stand there, you can see north, east, and west at a glance. So you know there's nowhere to run. So then the sea becomes a barrier as well. And yet, when I was doing research as well, trying to go back at least to the emancipation era, I found a great grandparent who was a fisherman. That was his recorded occupation. And I thought to myself, if ever, as someone who was formerly enslaved, you wanted to escape from the plantation field, I can imagine that the sea would have been a new freedom. So there are all kinds of paradoxes and complexities associated with how we feel about the ocean. And I'll just conclude by saying all of this came home to me very starkly during the pandemic because everything closed down. Where are we going to go? You know, you can't walk into the sea. And then we also had the volcanic eruption in nearby island. The ashfall closed down the airport and the port. And suddenly you had a new appreciation for even just being able to get on a boat and leave and go somewhere. They keep talking about how they're going to try and introduce West Caribbean ferry. I'm really looking forward to it. I know that it's not simple. Our seas are not simple. Barbados is in fact a little isolated because the currents don't kind of favor going to Barbados easily. But always a paradox. That's why I say we love it, but we respect it, because there's sorrow, there's joy, there's the barrier, there's the bridge. It's all wrapped up together.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Next, I'm going to ask you a question, Kevin. Talking about, culture and people that were carried, almost forced across the ocean, and it's very much infused your writing. Many different parts of the British Empire had this transport of labor. My great grandmother came from Goa to here to Zanzibar, then to East Africa. What does that mean to you, given that now the connectivity across the oceans is both easier and quicker than it's ever been, and yet also more restricted than it's ever been?
Sure. So, well, when you talk about, before I get into like connectivity, you talk about transporting something across seas, and I was thinking about broken telephone. When you the telephone, you try to tell someone one thing and then it turns into a whole different thing on the next end. And that is what happened with a lot of us who the ancestors came from India. When they were recording their names, the British were recording their names, they would just spell it anyway. Or they might just say, sometimes the people didn't understand the question, and they might say, what's your name? They might say Dookie, which actually means sad. I think they were thinking, how are you feeling? So you might have a lot of some Indian names might begin with Shri, S-R-I, like Shri Narayan, but the British would have written as C Narayan. So you can actually spot a Trini just by the name because of how these British recorded the names. Or we've owned the way in which our names have been. We wouldn't say misspelled. They've just been, they've been retaught, and we've accepted it as part of the identity. Now, but I also think about how language has changed. When you talk about connectivity, is that in Trinidad, approximately 40% of us are East Indian descent, and 40% also are African descent. And they did not want us mixing at all, because they know if we started talking, we would get ideas. But because of this, there was always this gap in language. And I bring up the broken telephone thing because words that they may have in other countries, even in other Caribbean countries, in India, they mean totally different things in Trinidad. So we've sort of reinvented words, reinvented language, repurposed words. And in a sense, you may think as that as a confusing or muddling thing, and a way in which that might disconnect people. But then I think about, and I hope you all will humor me a little bit, I think about a poem by Kamal Braffett, who comes from Barbados. And part of the poem goes like this. Give me the words so that the bees in my blood's buzzing brain of memory can make birds, can make flowers, can make sea, can make sky, can make heaven. It is not enough to be silence, to be void, to be pause, to be pit, to be semicolon, to be semicolony. Find me the words. Find me the stone, and I will break the void. Find me the rage, and I will raise the colony. Find me the words, and I will blind your God. And it makes me think about the... And what he was trying to do with that, Kamal Braffett, the name of that poem is Negus, which is actually the title of an Ethiopian king. And what he's trying to do with that is to show the power in which language, ancient and modern contemporary, can connect people across oceans, across time. And I think about things that have been lost to, to the sea, to memory, but it's more important to see what we've retained and what we've done with it, what we've repurposed with it.
Thank you, Kevin. We'll go to Javier next. And the sea and its history, for you as a journalist and a historian, you said the Colombian nation would not exist without the Afro-descendant population. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means to you and how important these connections are in today's world?
Todo proceso de construcción de Estado-Nación es mezquino. Es decir, todo proceso de construcción de Estado-Nación niega algo. Todo proceso de construcción de Estado-Nación se construye en contra de algo.
Every process of nation state neglects something else. Every process of nation state construction opposes something else.
Y en la construcción moderna del siglo XIX de los Estados-naciones latinoamericanos, la negación de los habitantes originarios como los indígenas y luego la diáspora, los descendientes de la diáspora africana que llega, se niegan como parte de la identidad de ese Estado-nación moderno.
So in Latin America, in the modern state, in the 19th century, this was the case of the construction of nation state against the indigenous communities or the communities of African descent to build the narrative of Colombia.
Y cuando se incluyen como una especie de algo agregado, algo exótico, algo, es decir, es como si el Estado-nación funcionara sin eso.
So, and when they get to be included like as an addition, so like something exotic. So the base of how the nation state works has a base, and upon it there can be precisely additions.
Por eso mayo, que es el mes de la afrocolombianidad en Colombia, siempre me buscan para entrevistarme sobre cuáles son los aportes de la población negra o afrocolombiana a la construcción de la nación colombiana.
Precisely in May, that is the Afro-Colombian month, I receive many questions precisely on what are the components of the African descendant in Colombian's identity.
Como si la participación de los afrodescendientes solo fuera un aporte a la nación y no parte constitutiva de la nación.
Like again, if the participation of the African descendant communities in Colombia was an addition of Colombia and not a base of our identity.
Porque su participación fue decisiva precisamente en la construcción de los principios de libertad con los que se construyó el Estado-Nación.
Since their participation was constitutive for the building of the nation state.
Es decir, sin la participación de los ejércitos bolivarianos representados en su mayoría por población afrodescendiente, difícilmente se hubiese dado la independencia de Colombia para luego construir el Estado-nación independiente.
And The emphasis is that without the participation of the African communities in the thoughts for independence, there wouldn't be precisely what Colombia is today. So they represent a fundamental component of the construction of the country as a nation state.
Entonces, los afrodescendientes no son un apéndice de la nación colombiana, son parte central de la nación colombiana y ya estoy aburrido de contestarle a los periodistas la misma pregunta o darles la misma respuesta.
So the participation of Afro-descendants is not an addition, it's part of the base of the constitution, yes, of Colombia as a nation state, and I'm bored of always having to answer that and that again.
Thank you. We are delighted to have the connection with the Afro-Colombian diaspora and think of this as coming back home. And when we come to visit you, we will think of it as coming home as well. Yamen, coming back now to North Africa, you've now crossed the sea, you're living in Paris, but I wanted to ask you about your thoughts around the Mediterranean. It's in the news every day. Migrants going, across this ocean, the sea. And yet, historically, it was very much a much more diversely unified, integrated landscape, both land and sea, with many empires that came and went over time. Today, it's, we think of it as Europe and North Africa as so separate, and yet both are touching the same sea.
What's the question?
What do you think about that? We're drawing these divisions across the world, and many of these divisions are across oceans. They're not necessarily across land. Okay. So like the Mediterranean, which is a single piece of water connecting all these cultures and societies, how do you respond to that as a writer?
C'est vrai que la Méditerranée, dans son histoire et dans son passé, était plutôt un espace de commerce et de collaboration plus qu'un espace de ségrégation.
So it's true that the Mediterranean in its past was a space of commerce and
collaboration.
Commerce and collaboration instead of a space of segregation. Yeah.
Et c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, malheureusement, quand on entend parler de la Méditerranée, ce n'est jamais pour des choses réjouissantes.
And today, when we hear about the Mediterranean, is not anything, or we don't hear anything positive about it.
Mais le vrai drame, moi, je pense, de la Méditerranée, ce n'est pas aujourd'hui la donne migratoire. Ce n'est pas seulement la question migratoire qui doit nous inquiéter.
So the problem about it is not really about migration. So the question shouldn't be only about migration.
Cette mer qui était le berceau de plusieurs grandes civilisations, les plus marquantes même de notre histoire humaine, cette mer est littéralement en train de mourir.
So literally, this sea, the Mediterranean, is slowly dying.
Et je me rappelle d'un documentaire que j'ai vu où on posait la question à un scientifique italien sur l'état de la Méditerranée et on lui a demandé est-ce que on peut encore sauver la Méditerranée.
So I remember watching a documentary from a scientist who was from Italy, and he was being asked what he thinks about the sea and whether the sea can be saved.
Et en guise de réponse, il a eu le rire le plus glaçant et le plus sarcastique que j'ai entendu de ma vie. C'était pour dire que non, c'était trop tard. Mais face aux journalistes qui l'interviewaient, il voulait quand même, je pense, maintenir un certain espoir. Et après son rire, il a dit oui, on peut éventuellement faire quelque chose.
So in his response, he was a bit sarcastic, and he said that he doesn't think the sea can be saved. There's no hope. But at the same time, he wanted to give hope to the journalists or the people who were interviewing him by saying that he still thinks that something can be done.
And j'ai vu, par exemple, en Tunisie où j'habite, des plages qui sont devenues tellement polluées, des plages dans lesquelles je nageais quand j'étais enfant, qui sont aujourd'hui des plages mortes où on ne peut plus se baigner. Parce que quand on a des États en faillite, comme l'est l'État tunisien, ben en fait, tout le traitement sanitaire des eaux usées, des choses comme ça, tous les déchets finissent dans la Méditerranée. Et la Tunisie n'est pas le seul pays qui fait ça, malheureusement. Il y a beaucoup de pays qui sont mal gérés pour diverses raisons. Hein. Je ne dis pas que c'est uniquement de leur faute, mais qui fait que la Méditerranée aujourd'hui, cette question migratoire, c'est vraiment la partie émergente de l'iceberg. Ce qui est en train de mourir dans la Méditerranée, ce n'est pas seulement les hommes, mais toutes les créatures qui la peuplent.
So I used to live in Tunisia, and I remember I used to swim where I used to stay in the sea. But unfortunately, today the sea over there is very polluted, and this is because we don't have a good government. And the bad governance is not only in Tunisia; it's also all over the world. So this question is not only about migration, but also environmental.
Yeah, the bad government throw used water in the sea. And this is killing the sea à petit feu, comme on dit, slowly.
Bit by bit, yeah.
Bit by bit. And Tunisia is not the only country who is doing this, who is mal gouverné.
So Tunisia is not the only country which has bad governance.
Parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'États qui sont en faillite ou en difficulté au sein de la Méditerranée.
And there are a lot of countries which are facing difficulties as far as the Mediterranean is concerned.
Et après, ensuite, je voulais réagir à ce que disaient mes camarades sur la mer en général et comment, en fait, cette chose qui devrait nous réjouir est quelquefois une source d'un grand chagrin.
So I'd like to react to what my colleagues said about the sea in general, because the sea is something that should bring us joy, but unfortunately it's bringing us
Chagrin, sorrow?
Yeah, sorrow.
Okay. Et comme on est là pour parler de l'Afrique, j'aimerais, si jamais vous avez vraiment l'occasion d'aller au Sénégal et d'aller sur l'île de Gorée.
And since we are talking about Africa, if you ever had the chance to travel to Senegal, especially the island of Gorée,
et il y a sur cette île une ancienne maison d'esclaves.
There is an old slave house on that island.
Et au bout de cette maison, il y a un tunnel qui donne sur la mer.
And around that house, there is a tunnel that leads to the sea.
Et quand vous voyez la mer au bout de ce tunnel, à l'époque où les esclaves parcouraient ce tunnel-là,
and when you look at the sea at the end of that tunnel, when pardon?
Le tunnel?
Yeah, when you look at the sea from at the end of the tunnel.
When you look at the sea when you are going through the tunnel, it means that you will never come back. We say c'est la porte, the door of
door of no return.
Of no return.
Okay.
And when you see the sea, when you see this corridor, you know, if you go to l'île de Gorée, you have des frissons. And then, yeah, c'est quelque chose qui glace le sang.
Yeah. So when you are going through that experience through the tunnel, it gives you goosebumps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Before we're going to go to questions in a minute, but I just want to build on that. What we are doing to the oceans now, and to get all of you to just give in brief your thoughts. part of the reason this high sea treaty is so important is because now there is another race for natural resources. The next big empires are the tech empires, but they need critical minerals, as we keep hearing from certain presidents. And where are those minerals? Many of them are in the ocean. And whereas before we could never reach them, now we can. This is changing the dynamics of power across the planet. And even though oceans are these continuous spaces, they're now becoming even more partition spaces. But it also means some places like Mauritius could potentially become very, very wealthy simply because of that geography of where they sit. The Caribbean is another space, given if they agree to go into the sea, completely destroy it, ecologically devastate it, and grow, the wealth of a lot of all the tech billionaires can become trillionaires. But how are we going to engage with that as writers, as creatives, as thinkers? We'll start with Javier. Yeah.
Bueno, yo creo que hay, digamos, las cartografías del océano y de los mares son unas construcciones que siempre han obedecido a las dinámicas del poder.
The cartography of oceans in the end have always obeyed to the dynamics of power.
Sí, ahora son precisamente lo que te referías, los minerales, los recursos que hay allí, pero en otro momento fueron otros recursos. El sistema de plantaciones que se estableció en el Caribe precisamente obedece a esas lógicas del poder que construye unas cartografías.
So nowadays is precisely the case what you were mentioning on the importance of minerals to design this cartography. But that happened also a time ago. For example, in the Caribbean, how the seek for resources was what determined how this cartography worked in the past.
Entonces hay una relación con el mar de comunicación y expansión, pero también una relación de frontera.
This determines the relation with the sea and obviously also with the relation among frontiers.
Cuando Yamen estaba hablando, si entendí bien la interpretación de la interpretación de la interpretación.
If I understood what Yamen said in the interpretation of the interpretation of the interpretation,
hablaba de la manera injusta como se está mirando el Mediterráneo.
he spoke about the unfair way in which is where the Mediterranean is described.
Porque solo se está mirando el Mediterráneo como un problema por el proceso migratorio.
Where the Mediterranean is partly described as a problem around migration.
Creo que la manera en que yo tendría que relacionarme a partir de lo que escribo con el mar y con el océano es entender que el mar y el océano implican una mirada más amplia de los discursos nacionales.
And precisely the way that I relate with the ocean and the sea is how precisely the approach to the ocean and to the sea relate with narratives and discourses that go beyond.
Los mares están para interpelar precisamente la mezquindad del discurso de los estados-naciones.
The sea is there to precisely question the narratives around the nation state.
Ayer o antes de ayer hablaba con Joaquín de Cabo Verde, que tuvo su presentación esta mañana, y él decía en un comentario informal, que es donde salen las cosas que uno no se atreve a decir en público, pero que son más ciertas, que Cabo Verde era Caribe también.
For example, yesterday I was talking with Joaquin from Cabo Verde, and he mentioned some things that you usually talk in small talk conversations that have a great value that you don't usually talk outspoken, and it's precisely how Cabo Verde is also Caribbean.
Y la, la colega de Islas Mauricio, perdón, no recuerdo el nombre ahora, si me lo dice, decía que cuando leía la obra de Kevin, decía, pero esto sucede exactamente también así, o parece que estuviera escribiendo de Islas Mauricio y no de Trinidad y Tobago.
And precisely when I talked with Priya of Mauritius, she mentioned that when she read the book of Kevin, she at first thought that it was a book of Mauritius and not from Trinidad and Tobago.
Si,
could have been.
Si se entiende los mares desde un discurso del Estado-nación más abierto, menos mezquino, implica, y aquí está el señor embajador de Colombia, y lo voy a comprometer, o ya está comprometido, que tenemos que establecer lo que yo he llamado una diplomacia de la sensibilidad.
So if we have a more open approach around the sea towards the construction of the nation state, and here is the ambassador of Colombia, and like I am compromising him. We have to do precisely a more ambiguous or more open description and narrative around the sea.
Y esa diplomacia de la sensibilidad tiene que acudir a la memoria, a la historia, incluso mucho antes de que se construyeran las fronteras mezquinas en términos conceptuales del Estado-nación moderno.
So this more open interpretation should be approached as a diplomacy of sensibility. And to do it, we have to approach the sea precisely around the thoughts about memory and with more a sensible approach to describe the nation state and the sea among those more integral concepts.
Hay un ejemplo muy particular que vincula al Caribe continental colombiano con el Caribe insular, que es toda la migración de gente de Haití usando el Darién en la frontera con Panamá, entre Colombia y Panamá, para cruzar hacia los Estados Unidos y hacer el trayecto por Centroamérica.
There is precisely a narrative, an example of this approach between the connection of Colombian Sea and the insular sea region. That is how in Panama Haitians and migrants are crossing to get to the United States.
A esas personas que migran por el Darién, muchos de Haití, yo le llamo los nuevos cimarrones.
Most of those people that want to cross through this path of the Darién, that some of them are Asians, I call them the new cimarrones.
Y la solución a esas dinámicas que genera la migración, no se puede solucionar el problema si no se acude a una diplomacia que supere las soberanías mezquinas que establecen los estados-naciones modernos.
And the solution to the issues that can be brought around this have to integrate this diplomacy of sensibility, where where the current approach don't capture the complexities and the dynamics of of the current issues.
Porque esa zona del Darién siempre fue un territorio donde nadie podía ejercer soberanía porque siempre fue un territorio fluctuante, de mucha movilidad, de mucha presencia de gente de diferentes espacios.
Because that territory of the Darien was precisely a region where there was a lot of fluidity and basically didn't properly belong to a certain power, and like that precisely explains what we're living nowadays and how we should approach it.
Y esa condición de contacto y de movilidad la define el mar Caribe.
And that specific situation is defined by the Caribbean Sea.
Thank you. Karen, would you like to?
So you're talking about the extraction of marine resources, and islands are land poor and sea rich because of the exclusive economic zone. But we've already come from a history of what it means to have our resources extracted, and I would like to think that we've learned some lessons from that. I was reading an article recently, Kevin, you can correct me, about Trinidad has already reached peak oil. So now has to look forward to a future where, the petrodollar base is not going to be there. But Guyana is now experiencing its journey to peak oil. So what I think some of our leaders are maybe trying to imagine for our future is something maybe that is not about extraction and not about just what structures can be built on land, but also look at the exclusive economic zone as also a place that is very much ours. In fact, even to look at the sea as a living entity that has rights, and that we have responsibilities to.
Thank you.
So, I'll say this, keep it simple. You said 70% of the world is the sea. The sea contains about 97% of the water, right? Whoever controls the sea, whoever could master the sea, whoever could master the water, and this is true antiquity and through the modern times and maybe the future, is who will control the world. From Columbus to Cortez to whoever needs the water to cool the ChatGPT machines, the servers. And then I'll use a Caribbean example here. Unfortunately, our last government signed a sort of treaty with the US. Donald, don't take away my US visa, right? He signed a, I see the camera pointing on it. But they signed this so that the US could enter Trinidadian waters. And so the US Navy right now is in Trinidadian waters. And what they've been doing, and obviously, there was a JD Vance was like on one of the news thing, and he's like, talk about Trinidad and Tobago. And it's like, well, nobody knows who's Trinidad and Tobago. Why are he talking about it? And that's because, they were planning to send the Navy there. And they've been bombing boats in Venezuela, which they said carrying drugs, but I don't think these small boats are going to carry it. And even if you're going to bomb boats in Venezuela on the Trini waters, and keep in mind, this is one country in our next country's waters because, they bought the whatever, they signed the treaty to enter whole different territories so they could drop bombs. They with judge, jury, and executioner. And but the thing is, they realized that, they probably couldn't do that if they didn't get Trinidad to sign that treaty, that they could have the Navy there sending drones to do that. And why they're doing this is because Venezuela has been encroaching upon Guyana. Venezuela has been redrawing their own maps. Kind of like America, it have the Gulf of Mexico, and now they call it the Gulf of America, right? And Venezuela has been making up their own imaginary map and say, well, this part of Guyana is actually Venezuela, but the US and ExxonMobil and all these oil companies doesn't like that. Because again,
To be fair, that's the legacy of British Empire all over again.
that's what I say. Whoever controls all these stories about the sea, whoever owns this, whoever owns passage, whoever could send their armies and their ships, and whoever could set up rigs, and whoever could set up their machines, and whoever could extract the resources, that's who controls. It's not who controls the land, as much as you would think. Is really who controls the sea, and that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. Just before we go to questions, I know a couple of our authors would like to do a short reading, and I'd invite them to do that if they'd like to do it. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. Yes.
I'll just do a short reading.
Okay, we'll do one short reading and then do
Yeah.
questions, because I know there are quite a
Yeah.
few questions.
Actually, I have a panel tomorrow. I could do the reading then. So let's go to the,
Let's
let's come tomorrow. Come tomorrow. All right. Okay. Let's. That's like people getting a little antsy. 2 minutes. The man was lost for a long time. He was the 10th child of 11. There was nothing special about him, nothing that made him stand out, nor that drew the attention of others. Animals never paid him any mind. People never remembered his name. His parents forgot to feed him. He never celebrated a birthday, never received any presents. When he bled, nobody saw. When he bawled, nobody heard. When he declared his love for a woman, she didn't know who he was. Nobody tended to him when he was sick. Nobody knew when he was fed up. And nobody cared when he left. He moved to the port and found a job there. He never considered himself a stevedore, longshoreman, sailor, nothing like that. He hadn't given consideration to a title of any kind. He had been scheduled to be aboard the ship that fated day, but a co-worker had taken ill. And that day, the ship had been attacked by pirates in the Gulf of Paria. Hungry men who smelled of salt. They took everything that had been on board, flue-cured tobacco from Amarillo, casks of Pampero Blanco, Winchester shotguns. Even the engine was gone by the end of the day. All for resale. They tied up the crew, and when the skipper cursed, they cut his heel and threw him overboard. They had brought the disembodied leg of some large animal, perhaps a donkey, with them, and tossed it right after hitting the skipper on the head. It wasn't long until the reef sharks came, and they pulled the captain and the skipper under, all his dreams under, everything he would ever be under, every memory, the first woman he made love to, the schoolyard brawls he won under. And after the skipper went over, the lost man helped the pirates throw the rest of his mates overboard, as calmly as if they were jetsam. Men he had worked with for months, men with wives and children, it didn't matter anymore. He tossed in the animal parts after them and watched them be pulled under by the sharks. It was a decision the lost man had made in only seconds. Any later, and he would have been pulled under the water with them as well. You are so small in the ocean, he realized. He chose well, but the important thing he realized was that he chose his fate before somebody else could. And what was lost had finally been found. Thank you.
We are so small in the face of the ocean. So with that, we will take a few questions from the audience. Just
Los cimarrones eran las personas que estaban en condición de esclavizados y se escapaban, se fugaban de la condición de esclavizados y se asentaban en un lugar, en un territorio. Normalmente había una estrategia militar para defender ese espacio donde se hacían, ¿no? En Colombia se les llama palenques a esos espacios, en Brasil se le llaman los quilombos, ¿no? Eran el quilombo de Palmares de Brasil es el quilombo más grande del mundo, podríamos decir. Y por eso hablo de los nuevos cimarrones, que son todos estos migrantes que están huyendo de algo, se van hacia otro lugar, pero ya son cimarrones transnacionales, ¿no? Que están usando los mares, saliendo de sus países, saliendo de las fronteras del Estado-Nación, no de las fronteras de los imperios de las que escapaban aquellos cimarrones, y que necesitan ahora para la solución a esos problemas de eso que decía de la diplomacia de la sensibilidad, que supere las fronteras conceptuales del Estado-Nación moderno para poder afrontar el tema de la migración.
So, so the concept of cimarrones are those that were enslaved and flee to another place and stay in a specific place, like from one place to another, and they just stayed in that new place, and that they had actually a military strategy to defend those new settlements, right? So in Brazil, the name for those settlements was called Quilombo. In Colombia, it's called Palenque, and it happened across the South America and the Caribbean. So when we approach the concept of new cimarrones, is the concept precisely of what nowadays we see on migrants fleeing of the frontiers delimited by modern nation state, and that fleeing from one place, from one frontier to another, and that's precisely the way of approaching this new phenomena under new concepts as the nation state and its barriers is through the diplomacy of sensibility that I built before. Maroon is the concept for cimarrón in English.
Yeah, thank you. Another question. Back here.
Hello. It was lovely hearing from all of you. But this question is specifically for Miss Karen Lord. So the sea is history, water is memory, and water is bridge. So through this concept, how do you actually reinforce healing in a world that covers literature? How do you recreate this narrative where we have a balm that creates that transition instead of divisiveness to an actual structure of cohesion?
You're always asking the big questions, aren't you? So, in many ways, I do feel that that is where literature and poetry come in. There are people I've mentioned before in Barbados, when we say the sea has no back door, it means you have to be afraid of it because you can drown so easily, and because maybe there's that ancestral memory of drowning. But there are ways in which people are trying to make people feel a bond with the sea, to feel a connection to the sea, to feel as if the sea is something that, yes, you still respect it, but it's a healing thing, it's a friendly thing. So there are also people who make sure to go to the beach especially the retired people. So it's interesting you use the word healing, because it becomes almost like I don't quite want to call it like a hot tub spa type of thing, but it really does become like that. And when you see authors like what Kevin read just now, which was brilliant, engaging with the sea and acknowledging both the pain it can bring, but also the connection it can bring, I think that even for those who are away from the coast, reading that, it does awaken something. It does seize in our blood. There is this sense of, this is not something I can just ignore or forget about, but it can become something that is healing and transformative in my life. I still go back to, we use the word respect. We have responsibilities to the sea as well. We can't always be expected to be taking from it. It's also going to be a question of how we maintain it, preserve it, how we show our love to the sea, that will then allow it to continue to heal us. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We'll take one more question.
Good evening, everyone. Mine is more of a pilgrimage, sailing with your words. I've sat here and listened to you, and this is what I've come up with. The sea. The sea has no back door. Black water quadrant so convincing to cross to Trinidad. Water holds no memory, tells stories. Is the sea a barrier rather than a bridge? Smell the sea, feel the light. The sea is a mystery. It's trouble, it's inspiring, sorrowful. A source of the constituent, a source of civilization, Colombia, Africa, Europe. The consequence thereof, defining the role of the African in that journey. The sea is their grave. North, east, west, there is nowhere to run. A barrier? Yet enslaved, your only source of freedom. The sea, like a broken telephone, was a reception like no other but sorrow. Retaught as an identity. Every creation neglects the cornerstone. Always an addition, almost exotic. Commerce, trade, segregation, slow death. Can the sea be saved with bad governance? Oh, Gore, the door of no return.
I'm sorry, can we have this gentleman's name again?
Yes.
I need to know it.
Yes.
My name is Kebaya Moturi.
Thank you. And with that, I am afraid we do have to end what has been the most riveting discussion. But I'm going to start by thanking our interpreters. Next, our panel. And one person who has done so much today, and it's been a very long day for them, and they've been amazing, Fuande and her team.